Welcome to High Five. This is the second edit because the last time I forgot to actually do a high five. It's Friday, and we always have these chats on a Friday to record our last 5 days of learning. And if you watched last week's episode, a fellow Rippler in Steve Brown nominated this fabulous lady who's on the session today. Hello, Amy Curtis. How the devil are you?
Hi, Amy.
Hello, Scott and Rory. Wonderful to be here. I was pleasantly surprised at 5 a.m. on an early morning when I saw Steve's recommendation for me. I was thrilled, and I'm really excited to be here talking with you both.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. I thought I asked this question to Steve last week because we was talking about the way he does things, and I was talking about how I find him and how I've worked with him and how I've got to know him. So our experience of knowing HR, Amy, has been competing in HR pub quizzes on a Saturday night, and me no doubt somewhere down the bottom end of that table, and you probably climbing slightly higher than me as well. But other than HR pub quizzes, tell us a wee bit more about yourself if you could before we talk high five.
Absolutely. Well, I currently right now I live in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm the one spot in the world that the weather is beautiful. It's going to be sunny and 80 degrees today. So it's definitely, this is the time of year where I appreciate being in Arizona. It's not my favorite place to be in the summer when it's well over the 118, 120 mark. But so that's where I currently live. And so I live here with my two kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And we are just getting through this situation as best we can. It's kind of how I get through it. On a work level, I am in human resources for a company called Connections Health Solutions, and we operate psychiatric emergency facilities. So it's like a psychiatric mental health emergency room, which is the best way to describe it. So we serve people who are in psychiatric crisis, whether they come in by family or by the police or on their own. And so we will hold them for a period of time, do evaluations, and then either keep them for a longer period of time or send them to another place. So we're sort of like a very large triage facility that kind of deals just with psychiatric emergencies. And my career before getting into HR I'm a licensed therapist by trade. That's what I went to school for. And when I was practicing, I always worked in psychiatric emergency mental health. So early on in my schooling, I found out that I really loved dealing with people in crisis because I could do something in the moment. I could fix something in that particular moment. And so dealing with that kind of population has always been a passion of mine. But it also comes with very high burnout because it's very hard hearing people who are at that level of crisis day in and day out. And I luckily found my way into the HR team of the company. And so I've been with them now, with the HR team, for about 7 years.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Rory and I were chatting before we come onto the call. Actually, we were speculating actually about you and your role in terms of front end and HR discipline, in terms of how involved you are with the nature of what your business actually does as well. So that's a really interesting perspective to understand your journey and where you've been with that as well.
Yeah.
Amy, you just reminded me as well. So when you said you were from Phoenix in Arizona, I once had the pleasure of making it to Scottsdale. So I did a situational leadership training course there with Apple Retail when I worked with them. And I've never experienced heat like it in that summer. So
Right.
You know exactly what you're talking about. And you're talking about the kind of late winter time. So Irish skin in Scottsdale summer don't mix.
Well, if I can describe the current weather conditions in Scotland right now, I'm going to use a word my granny would have used, and I'm not sure whether this word is international, but it's dreich, which basically means heavy rain, wind, storms, and everything all at the same time. If my office doesn't start to move midway through this, I'll be really, really surprised. The card that you were given by Monsieur Brown, I'm going to go and get that card for you. But we did something last week for Steve that was quite nice and special. We gave him a little gift at the end. So we thought we'd give you a super card for this session as well. So I'm just going to go and grab it.
Awesome.
So you've got the giant sized one, Amy, because you've joined us all the way from Arizona. Steve got this size, Lynn, you've got like that size. So that's a special gift to you right away.
Wonderful, thank you.
So this is a subject that I think is fascinating, as is the story on the card about sharing a mistake you've made in your career and what you've learned from it. And when we picked this, or rather when Steve had this card last week and he nominated yourself, I was fascinated about the selection process he went through to pick yourself for it, but also how that subject rests with you and your experience of it. So what's your thoughts on the subject of vulnerability?
Wow. So many things. And I was really surprised. I was, Steve is, he was talking about how he genuinely connects with people. And I met him a handful of times at SHRM conferences and, got to know him better through the HR pub quiz and through some Twitter interactions. But and then he sort of is like, I'm going to call you and we're going to chat. And he really does that. And then he really wants to get to know you. And then I'm like, actually, we're friends. And it's just amazing how when you open yourself up to those kinds of situations, which I think, the pandemic has allowed us to connect with people more easily than I think we would have had the opportunity to. And he's a perfect example of that. But when he says that he's going to connect with you, he means it. And, the fact that I was sort of the person on his mind when he drew that card was just, it was incredibly flattering and humbling. And, and it just makes me realize that he has both seen and heard me when we've had our conversations and when we've talked. And I think that that's just such an amazing gift, and I think it's amazing to have somebody out there in the world that is so good at doing that. So, I was really thrilled that he did think about me in that moment. I did think a lot about vulnerability, and there's so much that's out there on the subject. But I think in my world, what I've kind of come to notice is that I came into human resources and I didn't know anything. I kind of got into the job and I was like, I'm just going to figure it out. And what I learned is that nobody really has all the answers. We're just really good at trying to figure out where to go to the answers and how to find the answers. And I got really comfortable with admitting that I didn't know something. And I think that that's really hard for a lot of people. And that's sort of one of the vulnerability pieces that really comes into play in our day-to-day work is nobody expects me to have the answers, but they, the people that are on my team want me to help them think through the answers and figure it out. It's okay that I don't have the answer. Sometimes, we will deal with managers who are struggling with an employee issue, and they'll say, well, what should I do? And my first question is, well, what do you think you should do? What would you like to do? And that's when the therapy piece comes back to me too, is that one of the reasons why I got into the treatment piece is that I like to listen and hear and ask questions. And, what I found is that kind of plays into every aspect of my life is that, I just ask a lot of questions. And I try to really listen to what someone's saying and admit, whether it is at work or to my teenage daughter, that I do not know the answer, but I am just doing the very best that I can. And I think that when you are vulnerable in that situation and you're working with somebody, it just breaks down the walls. When you can just admit that I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to sit here and figure it out with you and sit with you and struggle through this mess, whatever it is, to get there. And so I think that's like the biggest way that I feel like that word kind of comes into play. I think some people take it towards, opening and bearing their soul and sharing all their deepest, darkest fears and secrets.
Yeah.
But I think it's really more about admitting what we don't know, but still being willing to learn.
Yeah. Steve was saying last week that he'll tell you anything about himself when somebody asks a question, which is a different spin, I suppose, on the subject of vulnerability. But when I hear you sharing that about the importance of what you've said, but really, really listening, like what the person said, and trying to operate in their frame of reference to understand it from their position. And in my own experience in that HR world, that sometimes when people come to you as an HR service provider, they expect that prescription or of a solution rather than the question that evokes a thought or a consideration of how they might have more independence of thought to solve some of those things and to think for themselves. It's like trying to get people to think rather than getting people to do. And in those moments to consider how they might act in those situations, it's brilliant to hear you.
I think for me as well, it's what I love hearing from you is it's okay not to have all the answers, and you can still have an expertise but not have all of the answers straight away. You might have to work through something. And if I think back on this particular card, vulnerability counts, if I think back to our very first high five session, so that was actually Scott interviewing me. And at that point in time, I was fitting out a new retail store, which is called Merchants of Fun. So that's the retail store of Red Knight Toy Group for me. And at that point, there was no furniture there. There was just myself and Justin, who helps me. And I kind of small nugget of an idea as to what it was going to be. And I've spent a long time in retail. And Scott and you and I were talking. Scott and I have worked together 20 years ago in retail, and I've stayed in and around that world. But I didn't know anything about starting my own retail store, especially in a very kind of focused educational retail store. I just wanted people to come and play board games. But the vulnerability of it for me was about just being open to what that store could be, how it could be different. And actually some of the stories that grew out of that in the first weeks that we opened, I completely didn't expect them. So we had parents with children with additional needs reach out to us because they needed support, and we were able to help offer solutions there. And again, I wasn't taking that from any expert point of view. It was just come into the store, let's talk, let's meet, let's work through it together, and we'll find out if we can have some fun and play games. And I think that's why I love this card. There's a couple of cards in the deck that I always keep going back to. This definitely is one of them. And I love hearing what you're saying there about just being open to conversations with other people who can help you through. And every time we have a high five, I always take away something from everybody we get to talk to. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So what?
Yeah.
Sorry, Eamon, you go.
No, it's kind of about being open to the possibilities instead of just having that one idea, because that's really where learning and growth happens. Is if I go back to somebody and say, well, what do you want to do? And they say, well, I want to do this. And it's something we've never considered or done before. I'm like, okay. And then we'll kind of talk through what are the risks and the rewards of doing that. But it gives us new ideas, just like you were saying. It gives you a new way of looking at something that you may not have in the past.
Yeah.
I love that.
It gets even more fascinating. I see when it becomes a team situation and you're working with a team of people and you're trying to encourage that openness of dialogue and vulnerability. I mean, when you're in larger groups and you've got the most senior person at the table who doesn't want to show any vulnerability, and you're trying to get the group to engage in it. Have you experienced that yourself in environments?
Yes and no. I think that because we are a behavioral health company, there's a certain level of openness in general. We're all very candid about what's going on. But I think that when it becomes kind of different is when people make mistakes, because that's part of you know, I want people to make mistakes. And, you know, one of the things that actually my boss and I are working on is letting go of some of the control we have over just the little things, and letting the people that are on our team just let them go out and do it, and let them make the mistakes, and us being okay with it, instead of, you know, maybe they're not doing it our way, but it doesn't mean that their way is wrong. It's just different. And, you know, and being okay with that. We know things because of experience, or how we kind of, the standard that we want. And you know, it's as simple something as sending out an all employee communication, something that's going out to the whole company about something that the HR team is doing. You know, we have very perfectly capable people that can write an email, but we kind of get into this thing where we're like, well, I've got to read through this, and it needs to like sound like something that I wrote, but it really doesn't. You know, anybody can send that out, and it's fine. You know, but it's sort of like, we're trying to figure out where do we have to be involved, and when can we let the team go make decisions, do what they want. And we always joke, like, then come back to the mothership. Come back to the mothership. Let's talk about it. Because one of the things that she did for me when I was learning, and I'm trying to do for my team, is that I'm behind the scenes, and I want them to go out and be the star. So if they're out in front of other people and they're saying, well, here's this program, or here's this, and I want to be behind the scenes supporting them, but I want them getting all the credit. And it's their idea, and it's their program, and they're the ones who's shining. And when things go sideways, they come back and they say, okay, here's where we're going to fix it. And they're going to go back out and be the star again. And so I think, yeah, that's, you know, that's part of one of the things that we're working on now too.
That's definitely something in my compass in my career history. And Rory mentioned earlier about he and I working together many, many years ago. And I remember we used to have a poster up in one of the back offices of one of the stores that we worked in, and it was the gentleman who was the CEO of Reebok at the time, had a quote around, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. That it shouldn't all just be about you, but actually when the team do something that's incredibly awesome and has massive impact on the people that you support, you know, you do get the credit. You get the credit through the performance of those individuals, not through it was your idea or it was your idea. It was that the team has achieved something by doing it. And it's definitely something that really, you know, resonates in me in terms of how those things work as well. If you remember that, Rory.
I do, actually. And going back to that point about, we spoke briefly about how Scott and I met, Amy. I moved to Scotland to study film studies. So that was in my past life. I was very much interested in movies and film, and yeah. And if you've watched some of the Connect calls back, I usually end up thinking about life in films. I always have done, and I always kind of find a film that I can look back to and think, yeah, that helps me make sense of the world or the problem I'm dealing with. And actually, just what we've been speaking about really reminds me of a Jeremy Irons movie called Margin Call. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Anyway, if you're not, there's an amazing scene at the start of the movie where essentially it's just going to come into the financial crisis, and all of these top CEOs in a room have made the mistake. They've basically played the market. The market hasn't worked. So Jeremy Irons is flown in as the kind of overall head of this banking corporation. And there's an amazing scene where he has everybody around the boardroom table, and they're all trying to admit to who made the mistake. So he calls on one of the junior analysts who realized that the mistake has happened, and he says that, I can't remember the full line, but he says something like, explain it to me as you would a child or a golden retriever, because I didn't get to where I am today by, you know, thinking about this in big complex ways. And I just love that's vulnerability to me. That's a head of a lead being able to say, let's just break this down into manageable chunks. And if you think about every problem in the world right now, that they can all be pretty much solved by working together collectively. But you have to have that vulnerability. You have to be willing to just put yourself out there and say, this is what happened. This is what we need to be able to fix, or how do we get to that next stage? You know.
Yeah,
So if
and
you
get
haven't seen Margin
the
Call,
ego
definitely.
out of it.
Yeah, Definitely check out Margin Call. Scott, I know you're not the movie man, so I'm always trying to get him to watch new movies, Amy, but it doesn't really always happen that way.
Is John Candy in it?
No, but Jeremy Irons is in it, so you should watch it.
Well, I watch it. Yeah, if you take that, like Lencioni's even definition of vulnerability is about building trust, and when people admit mistakes, it helps in the building of bridges, and it helps actually to find and discover better self, and to find better ways to find better self. And I've definitely seen that as well, Rory, about if the most senior person at the table won't be open about a mistake they've made, or they won't encourage it, at least it causes blocks in the system to make that work well. The other half of that, I suppose, was about the quality of listening that you said there within your story, Amy, that it's really important within the role that you do to operate in high levels of listening. I mean, is there anything skill-wise or craft-wise that you think that good listeners have or should have, or if you want to pay yourself compliments in that, was something that you think that you do as a good listener that other people should mirror to a degree?
Well, I think, and this, I'll get into my little therapy brain for a second, but the root of like most negative behaviors, so anger, irritability, all those things, it usually boils down to fear or shame. I mean, that's why we get frustrated or angry, and it's usually rooted somewhere in fear and shame. Those are like the sort of like the things. And so what I found is that when somebody is acting out or is angry, and I'm trying to get to a place where I'm trying to come to a resolution, sometimes it's just helpful understanding that chances are the reason why they're upset or angry is something to do with something that they're afraid of, or something that they're angry because they made a mistake and they don't want you to find out because they don't want you to think less of them. And then I think that's when the vulnerability comes in, and you come in and you say, I don't have the answer, but I'm here to help you. And you just sort of take down that wall, just by being open and not coming in with the judgment or the criticism or anything like that. I mean, it's one thing to give feedback to somebody and say, well, you really made a mistake here. This was wrong, or there was this, because we have to do that a lot. But I think it's, delivering that message as, yes, you made a mistake. Here's some ways that we can learn from it, but just taking that judgment out of it. Because I think we're all really hard on ourselves as it is. We all judge ourselves and beat ourselves up all the time. And, I joke around a lot with my daughter, because sometimes if she is not doing well in something, she is punishing herself more than I could ever do, you know what I mean? And sometimes, the way that we talk to ourselves is worse than we would ever talk to anybody else, or that anybody would ever talk to us. And I think that's just sometimes being aware of that and understanding that the other person is probably doing that and that, you have to kind of swallow your own ego and be a little vulnerable to not jump on that bandwagon and not continue to perpetuate that, those thinking. So.
Yeah. I remember you've reminded me of an event I did a few years ago with a company, and the fear was pretty obvious to me about the most senior person at the table, who just wouldn't be open to the team's opportunities to change things and to improve the way that they worked. And it actually took one of the most inexperienced members of the team to actually say and question that very thing about fear, to actually have any kind of conduit to change, or in the circumstance that they were operating in, that they were spending lots of time and money actually coming around a boardroom table and never actually getting to the root cause of the stuff that was really causing them the biggest issues.
Yep.
And when the listening levels improved, and when people were seeing it from the other person's frame of reference, it made a massive difference to what that team was able to achieve. I could actually see a team moving from tension to joy actually across a short period of time, because they were able to recognize some of the challenges. Paradoxically, I also asked the question of somebody once, in a team situation of what's your worst job, and he said this one. When his boss was sitting at the table, so maybe I should have chosen my question a little better and knowing the circumstance and that experience. So listen, at the end of High Five, Amy, we ask you to select a card. Someone else you'd like to nominate. So I know we got your little digital set over to you. So do you want to select one, or do you want us to shuffle and select one? What would be your preference?
I did select one, and I'm just gonna let it load here.
It's all right. Well, Rory and I can find the card for you, the physical one in front of us, if you wish to, and we can read it out. That's easy.
Which one it was, because I did it. So the one I chose was the Balancing Act.
Balancing Act. Okay. Let's do that one.
And for achieving work-life balance, and only because this is, yes.
Rory, he found it first.
We normally race each other, Amy, to see who gets there first. So.
Yeah. As a, you know, I'm a single parent, and I have a very demanding job, and with the pandemic, work-life balance it's just been, you know, a constant daily struggle of, you know, when I'm at work, I feel like I should be at home. When I'm at home, I feel like I should be at work, and, you know, kind of keeping those lines. So that's why I really like that card. And the person I thought of is another one of our, I don't want this to become like the pub quiz thing, but I think one of the people that I met, and I knew her before the pub quiz, and it's Olga Peeler.
Hey, Olga earlier. Oh, wow.
And, you know, what I appreciate for Olga is one time it was even before the pandemic, I think I had put something out on Twitter about how, you know, being a single parent is, you know, it's one of those things, like, I'm glad I'm in the situation I'm in. Just sometimes it's really, really hard doing it on my own and being the person that's responsible for all these decisions all the time. And I just put something out there one night, and, you know, she replied with something about me being seen and heard. And I was like, no one's ever said that to me before. Like, she was like, I see you. I know, you know, like you're seen and you're there. And I just thought that was phenomenal. And, you know, I think that she's really good at that. But I know that she is also getting ready to go on a new adventure. I think she's going to be getting ready to start a new opportunity. And I think she had some time off to kind of, you know, focus on her family. And she's kind of at a point where she's making some changes. So that's why I thought it'd be really fun to hear her talk about balance. So.
Wow.
I absolutely love that we're crossing from vulnerability counts to Balancing Act with Olga. Scott, I think it all just synchronicity wise, it all just comes together for us. I'm really excited for next week.
We were chatting to Olga yesterday in another session that we were doing. She was and I pinged her and asked her to join Clubhouse, and she said when she joined it made her day. So hi Olga, we're coming to get you.
We'll see you next week.
Coming to chat to you. So we'll have the Balancing Act for Olga up next time as well. That'll be really, really fascinating to hear. So thank you for nominating her, and thanks a million for joining us from sunny, warm, cozy in comparison to the Durandreich, Belfast and Ayrshire from our weather as well. Amy, thank you very much for joining us. Have a fabulous day. High five.
You too. High five.